All right.
And I'd say at 30 minutes after, someone will press start webinar, and then you're ready to go. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So they can join the meeting. Give them another seconds, and then we'll start webinar. Mike, you ready?
I am. Are you recording? I didn't see anything about the recording going.
Yeah, there's
Yep,
like a
it's
little
recording.
thing at the top.
Okay.
Left corner.
I probably can't see it because I'm showing off the presenter view.
I show 11:30.
All right. Here we go. Luck, everyone.
Luck.
Yep, you got this.
You should be all set.
Woo.
Sweet.
I'll let people come in, and then we'll get started.
Do we know what the registration number is so we know what we're looking to hit?
No idea. I'm looking to hit a number.
I just see the numbers rising once. So we'll give it probably a minute or two here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, from
happy
Munich.
journey.
Awesome, Mexico. Nice.
Ooh.
Mara, where in Mexico?
Putting her on the spot.
Yeah, Boston, Scotland. Nice. Taking this
Wow.
international.
London. Ooh.
Just a few more minutes, and then we will get started.
Ooh, the far off land of Michigan.
I could do my Irish accent, but I'll save you all from that.
Next time.
Alabama, nice. Texas.
Fine.
I think we're topping out.
All right, we're slowing down on the numbers. So do we want to get started?
Yeah,
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I'm Mike Henderson from Northwestern Mutual. Back in 2020, I was the communications chair for our Pride ERG. We did, I think, probably 5 panels last year. And at the end of the year, when everybody was looking back, the ACE in the Workplace panel really stood out. ACE is kind of an invisible identity. Not many people know about it. And I know prior to talking to Nicole in 2019, I had never really heard about it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I'm guessing since we have so many attendees, either you all already know a lot about ACE and want to learn more, or you're fairly new to this as well. Fortunately, these brave 3 signed up to share their stories, let us all know a little more about what it means to be asexual, and ACE in the workplace. All right, let's kick this off.
Hello all, I'm Nicole Eiler-Kerrigan. I'm a senior business analyst at Northwestern Mutual, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
I'm Frank Barris. I'm an IT business consultant at Northwestern Mutual. My pronouns are he, him, his.
Hello, I'm Rachel Duchesneau. I am a senior software engineer, just got that promotion, and my pronouns are she, hers, hers. Oh, and I'm from Northwestern Mutual, if you didn't figure that out yet.
All right, so first thing we're going to start off with is what is asexuality, and also why is that important? When we talk about asexuality, for a lot of ACEs, big items are visibility, inclusion, and understanding. I saw the title slide, ACE, the invisible orientation. That's a kind of a common trope for ACEs, but that's something that we're trying to push back on. Visibility can take a lot of forms. It's important. It's not necessarily super hard to understand, present the ACE flag, present ACE voices, make spaces for ACEs. Inclusion, kind of a similar concept, including ACE voices. Fine. Understanding, actually understanding asexuality as an orientation can be difficult for many people. When we talk about sexuality, we often, we have a line between heterosexual to bisexual or pansexual and then homosexual. You don't see asexuality on that line. In order to do that, you have to expand beyond just like a line and go a little bit more into a third dimension. Talk about the difference between asexual and allosexual. Allosexual representing somebody with kind of a typical sexual attraction. So the definition that we have here is asexuality, or ACE, is a sexual orientation characterized by a lack of persistent sexual attraction towards any person. When we refer to that, we're talking about persistent in terms of asexuality, since it covers, a large range. We're talking about it as an umbrella orientation. And in this definition, or if you Google a definition of asexuality, you might see something that involves a lack of sexual desire as well. And that's okay. That's a welcome way. A lot of ACEs arrive at asexuality that way, but that's not every ACE's experience. So this is the broad definition that we're putting forward, and just to represent that orientation. And to speak about that umbrella a little bit further, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Hello all, thank you, Frank. So asexuality, we consider it a umbrella orientation, which is a group of sexual orientations that all fall under the term asexual. And for those, when talking about asexual, we take it, everyone assumes the extreme, but we are seeing, well, you're not seeing, but basically there are many, many, many different points in the spectrum, points within the orientation. We used to talk about gray asexuality for those who identify as asexual, but they don't feel that it completely encompasses their experience. And if you go out on asexual sites, out on LinkedIn, out on Facebook, you'll see a lot of conversations around that fact. So there have been, in the last year or so, a lot more micro labels that have come out that help break down those different points within the spectrum. One that has been known for a while is demisexual, for those who only experience sexual attraction after forming a close emotional connection with a prospective partner. And then we get into some others, like phrasexual, which is the opposite of demisexual. Those are people who feel a sexual attraction, but that fades as they grow closer to an individual. And then we have a few others that are newer. Cupiosexual, basically, this is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction, but still desires a sexual relationship, or they have a sex drive. Physical, but not an emotional connection, not a relationship via the sex attraction. There's another one, a new label for those who have been known as sex repulsed ace, and some people feel that that's a very negative connotation or a negative, very base for them. They have the micro label now of Asexual. And then there are a couple that kind of speak to the overall spectrum and how it can be fluid. Ace spike is one, and this is someone who feels an intense spikes of sexual attraction. They're very intense, but brief. And then ace flux. Ace flux is an expression of that fluidity of flowing back and forth across the spectrum. And that is the sexual attraction varies over time. Next. One of the things we as ACEs need to discuss is the romantic orientation. And our romantic orientation is very much like our asexual orientation in that it is fluid. So you can have someone who is aromantic, meaning they don't form romantic connections with individuals. Alloromantic, they're totally fine with forming romantic connections. And then there's in between. So very much like we have the micro labels under asexual, a lot of different points within that spectrum also. And also, you know, you can be heteroromantic, romantic. Sorry, one second. You can be wanting a romantic connection with someone of the same sex. You can be one who has a romantic connection with an opposite sex. And then, you know, in between, bi, pan, it stretches the spectrum. One thing to keep in mind is in order for others to kind of understand asexuality and how we form connections, and the reason why we have to pull those two together is that society has for a long time tied sexual attraction to love or romantic love, which is a desire to pair up with someone on a long-term basis. I actually, when I came out to my mom, and when she found out what asexual meant, she wondered why I was with my husband of 26 years if I wasn't sexually or physically attracted to him. I explained that while not sexually attracted, I was attracted to him for his sense of humor, his intelligence, and love of science fiction. Full package. You know, there's so many things that build that romantic connection, and it's not just sexual attraction. And now I'll hand it back to Frank to continue.
Thank you, Nicole. Have the next slide, please. All right, we wanted to take the opportunity to highlight a few other ACE voices in the community, just as it's an umbrella orientation that covers a lot of different ground, a lot of different romantic spectrums. It also covers every generation, every ethnicity, nation, race, creed, ability, or disability. There's a certain perspective that, because the language is newly discovered, that the orientation itself is new or some product of the internet age. It's not. And I can't tell you how many times in the groups that I'm a part of that I have somebody who comes in who's 40, 50, around my age, and just discovers that language and comes forward with that, and just how powerful that is in transforming their experience to actually understand themselves. So all the people here have been great at promoting that visibility. On the left is Angela Chen, author of ACE, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex. Really long title, excellent book. I think it's a good read for anybody. It really breaks down a lot of the nuance of love, consent. You know, love is such a big overwrought word, and it kind of gets everything kind of wrapped into it. You know, we talk about sexual attraction, romantic attraction, platonic bond, sensual bond, all sorts of things inside of that. And I think one of the more powerful things about the ACE experience is breaking that down, you know, into components that you can examine a little bit further. And I think that perspective can have value to almost anyone. In the middle is Yasmin Benoit, based out of the UK, a fashion model. Also creator of the "This is what asexual looks like" hashtag. You can see a lot of the images from that in the background. She's done amazing work pushing back against, you know, perceptions of what asexual should look like. You know, we're not just one particular image that you can dress sexy and be an ace. You can dress however you like and be ace. And then I also wanted to highlight Dr. Pragati Singh on the right, founder of Indian ACEs, doctor and researcher, and conducting important research and pushing back against the still, unfortunately, fairly prevalent perception in the medical community that asexuality is a disorder instead of an orientation. With that said, I believe next that we want to get into some of our stories. I feel, thank you. Oops, too far. Thanks. All right, I'll start. I grew up in a pretty conservative background. I didn't have any understanding of the language of asexuality myself growing up. I just spent most of my life knowing I was different from others. I had peers, I had other guys, and I had these stories that I saw or read or watched, and all of it painted a certain picture of what relationships were, and how they should be approached, and none of it really matched my experience. I remember, like, my parents, sitting me down, having the talk, and make sure that you're very safe, and don't give in to temptation and all this sort of stuff. And I just nodded my head, but it's like, is at some point this actually going to be a temptation? Is this actually like something that's going to apply, that I'm just going to be irresistibly attracted to somebody? I waited for that to happen, and it didn't. So I pretty much thought that meant I was broken in some way, honestly, and it affected my confidence a lot. But I went through my life, and eventually in my 20s, I was fortunate enough to meet my spouse, and she's wonderful. And she, for a time that sort of settled things, but it didn't change the fact that I still felt, broken inside. And as wonderful as our marriage was and is, I still struggled with self-acceptance, and that kind of bled into every aspect of my life. Thankfully, a few years ago, she introduced me to the term demisexual. And when she put it to me, at first I was a little, I'm not sure about this. I'm a white male. I've got a ton of privilege. All that sort of, those thoughts, initially kind of creep in your mind. It doesn't really make sense. But I looked at it. I did my discovery, my research. I listened to a lot of other people's stories, read a lot of people's stories online, and elsewhere, and it really fit. And eventually, I determined that I am asexual, demisexual, and panromantic. And it was incredibly powerful. It gave me a reference point to understand who I am. It helped me not feel broken inside my relationship, my personal, connections with other people, professionally even. It gave so much confidence. I often associate it to, like, I was adrift in the ocean. All of a sudden I had, a landmark somewhere to navigate by. I've been playing a lot of catch up since then. As I mentioned, I have a great group of friends. My partners are wonderful. I got ACE communities online. But I wanted to come into work. I wanted to make sure that if there's anybody else in my company who was feeling that as I did, who just discovered this, they had the opportunity too. So I went to my first Pride ERG event, and I was shocked to find that Nicole was actually up on the stage with a big ACE flag behind her and speaking, and there was nothing but support, understanding, enthusiasm coming from my and I'm family. And yeah, I can't say how powerful that was and how included that was in that. You know, a Pride Month that sometimes is difficult, that often sometimes feels like more of a battle than, you know, a celebration for me. It was just wonderful. So yeah, that's about my story. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Nicole to share hers.
Thank you, Frank. Frank talked about the panel that we had a couple years ago for Pride, for the beginning of Pride Month, in which I participated in. And one of the things, I had just come out at work as asexual to individuals within our Pride ERG at NM. And one of the things that I wanted to do, being ace and being involved with the Pride ERG, is I wanted to make sure that other individuals are aware of what asexuality is, and that it's not, that's something that, you know, physically wrong with an individual or mentally wrong with an individual, because that was my experience for a very long time. I'm very similar to Frank. I didn't have the language to explain what I was going through as I grew up. And I came out later in life. And actually, I will be 50 next year. And I came out about 5 years ago to my husband, and a little bit later to my mom and my family. And so my goal was to make sure that others didn't go through the experience that I had. And basically, when I was growing up, I was brought up in a fairly liberal environment. My mom was raised Roman Catholic. She raised me Roman Catholic, no longer Roman Catholic, but and then my dad was German Lutheran, which can be very, very, very conservative also. But as I said, they were fairly liberal in their thoughts and beliefs in politics. So that gave me the ability to, it was kind of double-edged sword. Basically, I decided that I was going to be very specifically something when I grew up, and that was, I was going to embrace sexuality. I was going to embrace the need and act of sex within our life, you know, that I wasn't going to be frigid. I wasn't going to, you know, shame anyone for the love that they may have and how they express that love. And, you know, basically I wanted to embrace it wholeheartedly. And I was missing something, seriously missing something. Those of you who do identify as ace probably know what that is. And that is, I was never sexually attracted to anyone. As Frank said, you know, the whole thing was, you know, they look nice, aesthetically pleasing, handsome, pretty, whatever you consider those terms to mean. But sex? No, just not what I'm interested in. So it was a very difficult thing, especially when I met my soon-to-be husband, and we had a relationship. We had a very good relationship, and we also had a fairly strong sexual relationship. But once the novelty of sex wore off, it was gone, and there was just, you know, there was nothing that I really attached to that other than enjoyment briefly, and, you know, nothing that was driving me to do anything beyond that. My love is not connected by physical attraction. It's more mental, it's more cerebral. And I spent a lot of time talking with doctors and trying to figure out if there was something physically wrong with me, something mentally wrong with me. And, you know, for a long time it was, well, you're on birth control, that may cause some of this problem. Well, you're on Prozac, or you need some antidepressants, and the antidepressants is what is, you know, suppressing your sexual desire. Yeah, went through several phases of that over the 30 some odd years that I was trying to figure out my sexuality and what was going on there. And, you know, it all came down to, it's a common denominator, and that common denominator is me. And this is just the way I am. So I kind of dived into the whole, okay, what does asexuality mean? And reading the books and the materials that I found, I'm like, this is me. This is what I have always been. And at the end of it, I have been very happy, very content, more so than I have ever been with myself in my entire life. Once I, basically identified myself and said, this is me. And I want to make sure that no one else who identifies as asexual goes through what I went through. I think from there, we can now introduce Rachel.
Thank you, Nicole. My story, it'll probably reflect a lot of what Nicole and Frank already said, but I will start from the top. I also grew up not really knowing the terms asexual, let alone demisexual, gray sexual, anything like that. I knew I was different for most of my life, because even when we were in high school or college and people talked about having crushes, I didn't really have any, like not in the sense that they did. And whenever we talked about it, they'd say stuff like, oh, you have to have a crush, everyone does. So sometimes I'd just randomly pick someone I know and decide, oh, that's the person that I'm gonna have a crush on this month. And so it was just difficult growing up like that and not really knowing why I was different. I thought that I was broken. I thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't understand when people called other people hot or sexy. I was like, I don't get it. They look nice. They look all right. They're pretty. They're handsome, but that's about it. And that didn't really change until I got to college, and I was on the internet more often, and I found the term asexual. And after that, I definitely started researching more into it and identified almost immediately with it. But even though I did identify right away, I didn't really come to terms with it until recently. I used to be in a worse relationship, and he thought that me being asexual was a waste, and he made me do things that I didn't want to do just because he wanted to fix me. Sorry. But there wasn't anything wrong with me, of course. Being asexual isn't wrong or bad, but it was a tough part of my life, and it was just because I was the way I was. I mean, there was nothing I could do about it. That's just how he felt about it, and he didn't really know the terms. He didn't really understand what I was trying to explain to him, and to him that meant I was, I guess, like against him somehow. But thankfully that's over. My more recent significant other is extremely supportive of me. And nowadays I have a lot of supportive family and friends. I'm not out to my entire family right now, actually. I'm working on it. But honestly, like seeing all this support here, this is the most support I've ever gotten, ever. And I'm really grateful for it. And I'm grateful that I got this opportunity to share my story with everybody. It's sometimes still a struggle, and I do really appreciate Nicole and Frank asking me to be part of this panel. I mean, at first when they asked me like, hey, you wanna like join a little ACE group, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm like super comfortable being ACE yet. So I don't want to like bring them down while I'm trying to figure out myself, but it's been wonderful. And like, it feels so much nicer to be able to come into work and be myself. I mean, I've had coworkers like just walk up to me and ask what asexual is, like without judgment. They were just like, oh, hey, I just want to know more about you. And it's like, cool, I didn't really have that before. But even though sometimes I still struggle a little bit, it is a lot better than it used to be. I would say that it's been like 2 years since I finally came to terms with being asexual. And in that time, I kind of identify more with demisexual because of my most recent significant other, but I'll use either term. That's the great thing about being on a spectrum like this, is you can just like pick whatever feels right with you. Okay, that was a lot. But we're telling you all these stories so that we can be more, well, less of the invisible orientation and more actually visible to everyone. So on that note, we'll go to our next section, which is about some misconceptions with asexuality and what asexuality is not. So our first thing we want to go through in this next slide is next one with the little graph. Is it actually there, or am I lagging? There it is. So here we are going to talk about how asexuality is not celibacy and is not abstinence from sexual activity. As you can see on this little graph on the right, aces have very different feelings about sex. It's not really a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. Some asexuals can definitely be celibate if they want to be, and others can have a really high sex drive and just want to have that in their life. There's also, if you look on the left, it's a little small, but it's different ways to view sexual activity. There's how you relate to sex in general, which is the stuff on the left: sex positive, sex neutral, sex negative. That stuff is mostly, I mean, asexuals can be any of those, but that's just in general what you think about sex. And then on the right, it has stuff like sex favorable, indifferent, averse, and repulsed, which is what you feel about it when it comes to yourself. So you could be sex positive and not like, you think it's fine. It's fine. Sexuality is fine. And then you could still be sex averse for yourself, like just not really be into it. And the point of us showing you this is asexuality is not tied to your sexual activity. It is tied to your sexual desire. And next, we'll talk about how we are not broken and we don't need fixing. This is going to be, this is probably going to resonate with a lot of aces because we didn't have this terminology asexual before. So we thought, you know, there's something wrong with us, but asexuality is not a disease. It's not a flaw. You're not wrong for being asexual. There's nothing wrong with you. It is just an orientation that you can identify with. And it is a valid orientation, and you do not have to be afraid to identify as asexual. And our last point we want to make is that asexuality and asexuals are a part of the LGBT+ community. So as you can see from our stories and everything, there's not a lot of visibility around asexuality, and being a part of the LGBT+ community helps us to kind of spread that message of what asexuality is and become part of this wider community. And the more visibility there is, the less people will feel broken and lost like we were. Some people like to say that because asexuals could be like homoromantic asexuals, they say, oh, well, that's just a straight passing person, like you're not part of the LGBT community. But they are wrong. Don't listen to them. We are still part of the community. Just because you're straight passing does not mean you are not part of the community. And like, we may be different than some of the allosexuals in the community, but differences, we love differences in this place. We're here to support each other. And that's what's important here. So in that vein, I'll pass it on back to Mike.
Yeah, so thanks for sitting through this. As I mentioned, when we did this last year, this was by far the most popular panel that we did. I mean, part of it is these amazing stories that Frank, Nicole, and Rachel had just shared, but yeah, they saved some good stuff just for this one that they didn't do last year. So yeah, this is great. Before we sign out and start doing questions, though, I want to let everybody know that you can stop by our photo booth over in our sponsor store. You can either scan this barcode or navigate over, hopefully after we close this session, and take some really cool photos. Everybody's contact information is up here on the screen. I'm sure Nicole, Rachel, and Frank would all love to carry on a discussion with you. I hope that's okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think it would be, it's amazing this year after, so there was no ACE panel last year. I think, Nicole, you saw your first ACE panel at Out and Equal 2 years ago.
Yes.
And now we have two ACE events this year. So I want to make sure everybody in attendance here knows about the Asexual Aromantic Community Roundtable tomorrow at 11:30 CDT. And we're all looking forward to ACE Awareness Week, October 24th through 30th. I know we have a lot of great things ahead of us at Northwestern Mutual. I hope you all have some great things ahead of you for ACE Awareness Week at your companies. But I would like to put this on hold a little bit and go over to the chat. Please send any questions you have our way in the Zoom chat. All right, we have one from Skylar, pronoun she, her. Can you describe how to meet the needs of both people in an ace-allo relationship? My partner is very ace, absolutely no interest in sex, basically repulsed, and I am demi, but consider myself more allo. Anyway, for those in ace, especially those who are closer to repulsed by sex, or anyway, for those in an ace-allo relationship, how do you handle each person's needs in that relationship? Who would like to take it?
I can start because my husband is allosexual, and when I came out 5 years ago, it was really difficult for him, and it took quite a long time. All I can say is talk with your partner. They need to talk with you. You need to understand what each of you need, and also to recognize their needs and meet them as much as you can. Certainly, if one or either of you are negatively viewing the other, that's definitely not a really way to build a relationship. But for me, it's been a long conversation that has ebbed and flowed over the years, and it still continues.
And the follow-up to that is Skylar is thinking about an open relationship, but feels that it's basically impossible as a demi because she does not feel comfortable being poly. Any advice?
I mean, I'll dab in there a little bit. I'm actually poly. I identify as demi as well. And I don't know if this actually helps in your situation. It very well may not. But for me, when I kind of established on the single hand number of connections with somebody else in my life, my spouse had already done so. But when that happened, I guess I was just because that connection is like extremely potent and powerful, that it comes there and singular oftentimes. It doesn't necessarily have to be. But in terms of like how to deal with the dynamics between one partner who is sex repulsed and somebody who isn't, that's hard. That's hard in any relationship, I think. And I mean, communication is obviously huge. There's a lot that, you know, that's true in any relationship as well. But, you know, it's kind of establishing what each person needs and what each person is willing to give. And I do kind of go back to the ACE book on that, because there's a lot there on breaking down consent a little bit further, and like what kind of things are okay or what kind of things are not. And I think that's a decent read. If you hadn't gotten it, that might help. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of groups out there that can, you know, of ACE folks, and kind of surrounding with those voices and getting advice from elsewhere is also really powerful.
All right, our next question comes in. Any advice for someone that definitely identifies as ACE, but is terrified of coming to terms with the identity because they fear of ending up alone?
I'm kind of going through this lately too. I think that's why I had such a hard time coming to terms with being asexual. But I will say there are lots of people out there. Like, if you want to be in a relationship, you can find someone that will accept you for who you are. I thought after my terrible time that I would not find anyone who would want to be with me, but my current significant other is always very supportive, even though he's allo, is always very receptive of what I talk about when it's ACE related. So I know that fear of ending up alone, but honestly, you'll get there. Deep breaths. You are who you are. Nothing wrong with that. There is someone out there who will support you. I mean, look at all the people supporting each other here right now. There's bound to be someone.
I'd also add, you know, most partnered relationships go a lot better when you can find the way to accept yourself. So it's a difficult journey. It's very easy to say that. It's hard to actually get there. And, you know, everybody's probably still getting there in their life.
Yeah.
But, you know, if it's core to who you are, and it, you know, likely is, then yeah, take that road.
Next question is, can you all clarify the distinction of the addition to the word persistent in your definition of asexual?
Yeah, I'll happily do that. We talked about a number of identities, you know, Demi and Frey, for instance, being one. Frey-sexual, where you would experience sexual attraction, and then that would vanish as you get to know somebody. So when we use persistent, we use that as an inclusive term, because you can be on the asexual spectrum and still experience sexual attraction in limited circumstances. So that's the big point behind the persistent. You know, it's not the like, you know, I'm always horny or not sort of a question. It's just a matter of attraction.
I think the identity of ACE spike really illustrates that persistency is key, because there are identities within the ACE spectrum that attraction is there in certain circumstances, and for others it's not.
All right. Any recommendations for online ACE communities? Frank, you know a lot about online communities, so hopefully
Sure.
you can share.
I mean, there's always AVEN, the Asexual Visibility and Education Network. I am personally part of a few on Facebook, Welcome Asexuals. It's a moderated private group, so you know it's pretty safe. I would say pretty safe because, you know, moderators sometimes slip up. There's a few other groups on Facebook that you can search, or you can message me directly. I can direct you toward a little more specialized. I'm imagining most of you aren't live action role players, and you know some of them are very specific. One of the apps is really good for that too. But I also recommend on YouTube ASTAT, really good YouTuber. Talks about ACE issues, a lot of the coming to terms with it, definitions, you know, coming out. Great content. I've looked through a lot of those, and if you're more into videos, good stuff.
Thanks. All right, next question. My partner is Demi. We talk about our needs constantly and are both receptive about it, but I don't want to mistakenly erase her. Any suggestions?
I'm wondering what you're doing that makes you think like you're erasing her. I mean, just because you're in a relationship, you don't stop being asexual, or Demi in her case. As long as you're communicating with each other and you're not, assuming things about her just because of her identity and everything like that, I don't see how you could mistakenly erase her. I definitely see the concern. I can understand the concern for sure. Maybe one of the others knows.
I mean, like, I think it's possible to like not see the other person and like get that that's part of who they are. So, I mean, that to me, that really goes back to understanding them, and that's, communicating and listening to them. You may not get it. If it's an experience that isn't yours, it's hard to understand it. But just keep listening and trying, and maybe even look at some other, content, some other voices that help kind of frame the reference. Because yeah, obviously you want to understand your partner if you're in a relationship or partners.
Next question. I just had a best friend come out as asexual. How can I best support them and help them not feel invisible or like they're alone in their journey?
I would say
Tell them that, first of all.
Yeah, exactly. Also, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that, that some people will assume that there's absolutely no, sex for asexuals. Some people will assume that, they can't have kids or they won't have kids, or get married, which, again, a totally different view of attraction, but there is still attraction out there for us. And, basically listen. I think a lot of everything comes down to listening and validating that you are hearing their voice. And that's the best way to support people.
Our next question. Hello, I'm part of my agency's Pride ERG, and we're wondering if you have any specific advice for how we can support our asexual community. What has been the most valuable for you for feeling supported in the workplace?
I think just the Pride ERG. I mean, when I came out to the Pride ERG, I can't say everyone had never heard of ACE, but a lot of people who were active in the Pride ERG didn't know what ACE was, what asexuality was. And I think getting that voice out there, getting that that those ERGs and BRGs recognize asexuality and the points within that spectrum from ACE to allo, that I think is the best thing, is to let people, because we call this the invisible orientation, and they think that maybe only 2% of the population identifies as ACE. Now, I will question that, because if you don't know what you are, how can you identify yourself as ACE? But we do seem to be a fairly good minority within the LGBT community. And what we really want is to belong.
I would definitely echo that. And if you're looking for things to do within the Pride ERG, then like celebrating stuff like Ace Awareness Week, or like if you have a book club, include books with aces in them or other books about being ace. Just like find a way to kind of weave it into the rest of the LGBT activities that you have in your Pride ERG. Just a thought.
Definitely the visibility is huge. I think other things that can be really important company supporting benefits for domestic partners. Not every ace is comfortable getting married. You know, we talk about queer platonic relationships, you know, being able to support those fully. That's big. Yeah, all of the awareness pieces that were mentioned, those are good. I think creating safe spaces, like, you know, for us, we kind of, you know, in this pandemic environment, we did it on one of our social platforms, right? We just created a channel that was just like, you know, for us. And I think that can be good for any group, but, you know, kind of encouraging or fostering those areas where people can share and to do so safely. So anything that can create a more safe space is critical. And I think another key component of that is kind of an attitude, and it's a little broader, but how are you talking about like success in your company? Like, does it revolve entirely like around, you know, like, you know, obviously career, but like, you know, family, getting married, having kids, all of those sorts of things? If your attitude is that is naturally success, and if you don't have that, you don't have success, I think that it doesn't just invalidate aces, but there's a lot of aces who don't necessarily want that in their lives, and a lot of ARO folks as well. And I think it's important to kind of decouple that. Success is, for a person, is what they want, and that should be okay. So, you know, don't, you know, necessarily like look down with pity or something like that. That isn't warranted if somebody's, you know, happy with what they've got.
Before I jump to the next question, there was a recommendation for an online source. There's a Discord server called Acecord, ACECORD, which this commenter found helpful in order to ask questions and get feedback. So hopefully that's helpful to anybody else looking for additional resources. Next question. Are there any micro inequities that you all have faced in the workplace that we can help bring awareness to?
I don't know if it's inequities. I do think the platonic relationship, as Frank mentioned, the fact, and I view this as a microaggression, that people who don't understand asexuality basically view us as being sexual, you know, emotionally immature. That we have not basically fully matured in our ability to have relationships. That's one of the biggest ones. That is, you know, the assumptions that, oh, you're ace, you're not going to have kids. Oh, you're ace, you have no idea what sexuality is at all. And I will say some of them don't, but a lot of us view it from the outside and understand kind of what's going on there. One of the big ones is, oh, you're ace, why are you dressing like sexually?
Sexy.
Why are you
I'm just wearing clothes.
Yeah. I don't like the way I look. Well, why do you like the way you look when you're dressing sexy? That doesn't mean anything to you. And it's like, but I like the way I look. People like the way I look. I like to be seen in a positive light, physically, mentally, emotionally, and, you know, with my intelligence.
Also add, I mean, as far as like a kind of microaggressions go, a lot of it, if somebody comes out to you as ace, I say one of the great ironies of asexuality, and sort of an irony, it really isn't, but sort of, is that you have to talk about sex a lot when you're ace, when you're describing to people. Don't ask, you know, if somebody wants to share with you, fine, but don't ask. You know, you don't ask things like, but do you masturbate, or have you just not found the right person, or
Just
you know,
the
other
worst
questions. Yeah. I guarantee you, if somebody's come out as ace, that they put a lot of effort and more self-discovery into it than you have, you know, if you just reacted to that with that, you know, first question that popped in your mind. So listen, first off.
I think one of the reasons why we tend to end up, ACEs tend to end up talking about romantic love more than all of the others, because again, I think society ties love, sex to romantic love. So for someone who is homosexual, they are saying that not only they're sexually attracted to them, and everyone assumes, oh, you're sexually attracted to that gender, you will fall in love and be happy in that with that. For us, because we say, you know, it's not missing, but it's not there for us. People assume that we can't form romantic relationships. So we have to tie that together and remind people those are two distinct things.
Right. So we do have about 5 minutes left, but I think we're all good hanging out. We can run 10 minutes over and still answer questions. So if you're willing to hang out with us, I think we're willing to continue. Our next question. My daughter told me that she believes she has ace arrow. I'm trying to be super supportive. I want to make sure that she doesn't feel socially isolated from her peers. What suggestions do you have for parenting an ace arrow tween and teen?
I would probably suggest giving them materials and community as much as possible, right? I mean, you know, sometimes teenagers can be tough. I know I had a situation in one of my groups where, you know, they were describing crushes, and you know, the ace arrow individual in question didn't have any crushes, and that wasn't like okay, and it makes you feel unsafe. And really, I mean, what you're dealing with is kind of a tidal wave of stories that all push a different narrative than your experience. So giving that exposure in terms of media, books, and people or community, you know, safely as much as possible. But you know, kind of giving that perspective and giving them the time and space to, you know, understand and, you know, kind of identify with their sexuality, and, you know, understand and be okay with the fact that it's, you know, it's fluid, and it, you know, it may change. Sometimes that happens.
Next question. Can you talk more about asexuality in the LGBT plus community? I am Demi, but I don't feel like I can really claim a spot in the queer community as I present as straight.
I told you not to say that present as straight thing. Ooh. But in all seriousness, I know it can feel like you're not part of the community because of that, but I mean, you wouldn't walk up to some bisexual person and be like, oh, you're straight passing because you're dating someone that's like their opposite gender. I mean, it's kind of in a similar vein-ish, is how I see it, at least.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
I think, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Frank.
Oh, okay. I think there's, you know, it's a difficult question, right? It's hard. Sometimes it's hard. You know, I've felt feelings like, you know, like I've got things pretty good, you know, whatever. But it's also like, what can you bring into the equation, right? Asexuality and aromanticism like runs a thread through every sexual orientation. You know, it's its own spectrum kind of within that. You know, I know I've heard panels here in Out and Equal where, you know, people have mentioned that if somebody feels a romantic attraction to, you know, multiple genders, that they're part of the bisexual community, and that's true. So if you like these, you know, if you're, you know, demi and, you know, heteroromantic, yeah, it's easy to feel that way, but you also have a lot to offer. And, you know, kind of turning that on its head, like if you feel like, you know, you're not sure that you belong, I mean, bring something in, and I think that helps. And I think you'll probably discover that, you know, there's a lot of elements that'll help you too.
Our next question. I struggle a lot with my desire to want a family and a happy home life. and how can I, and how I feel that conflicts with my asexuality. Is there any advice on how to overcome that?
Those aren't mutually exclusive. You can have a
Yeah.
happy home life and a family and be asexual.
Mhm. Yeah, that is definitely, if that has been presented to you, then that is a very broad misconception, because, you know, we are attracted to people, we want to bond with people, we want to pair up with individuals, and maybe larger than a pairing, depending on your preferences. But to have a family, everyone deserves a family. If you want children, everyone deserves to have children. Doesn't matter if you're gay, straight, transgender, aromantic, asexual, or anything in between.
Next question. How do you come out at work, considering you have to share information on intimate feelings or the lack thereof? I know you had mentioned when in an ACE panel 2 years ago, Nicole, you had a question of why do you come out? Can you share a little more?
Why do we come out? Oh my gosh. That was a painful question. And it wasn't directed at me, it was directed at the individuals who were holding their panel. And we come out because we have found that we have been stuck in a closet defined by society that says you have to be a certain way. And when you come out and state what you are, you're taking your life back. You're taking yourself back. You are being the most authentic you can be, and proud of it.
I'd like to dovetail on that. I mean, when it comes to like coming out at work and, you know, like having to share, you know, a bunch of personal stuff, first off, you don't have to. You are allowed to just say, I'm asexual, and you don't have to go into the depths of it. You might choose to, and that's a gift, right? You're giving the gift of your experience to, you know, whoever you're listening to, whoever you're coming out to. But it is perfectly valid to come out as asexual and not answer those questions, and respectfully, you know, that's, you know, I hear what you're saying, but I don't want to answer that question. You can give as well, you know, as much or as little as you want to. I mean, and that's one of those things with coming out. I mean, you know, we tend to think of it as like a one-time event, right? It's not. You just keep coming out. You know, we're still coming out right now, you know, and that story evolves over time. You come out to, you know, everybody that you choose to be your authentic self with, and it's giving that gift. And why do we do that as aces? I mean, you've heard why. All three of us have shared stories about, you know, we grew up without this language, without this reference point, and it affected us personally and professionally. So when you come out, you create that visibility, and the next person, hopefully at an even, you know, a progressively younger age, doesn't have that. You know, I love it when I see, you know, that a teenager has discovered this sort of stuff. It just makes me feel so good, because I know they're not going to have to go through the same long journey in the dark like me. And that's why we do it. That's why the visibility is important. And if you're in a safe and brave enough space to come out, you know, that's why it's powerful and potent, but only if you feel safe doing so. You don't owe it to anybody.
Yeah. All right. So how does asexuality interact with other sexual identities? For example, if I'm asexual, and I think I probably am, I would consider myself as a lesbian asexual. Does that even make sense? I think that does, but I hope I can pass it off to the panel for a little more.
Definitely. I identify as heteroromantic asexual. You could be gay, homo romantic asexual. It runs the gambit.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And most of those communities, I mean, they should, you know, not all do, but they should also welcome you as well. I mean, you're part of that community as well. And I know a lot of the panelists here at Out and Equal have made that a point, and I appreciate it when they do. And I think that needs to grow because, yeah, the experience inside of a homoromantic, for a homoromantic asexual is different. You know, it is unique. There is, you know, just like it is if you're Black or if you're Asian or if you're Indian or if you have autism. I mean, it's just all of these things are different experiences, and it's okay to seek, you know, support inside each community.
And we received a few questions about books, so I'll try to do some sort of amalgamation. Is there a book with strong asexual characters or asexual characters or books that that show asexual characters in a positive light that you would recommend?
I would reference Ace Week. I think it's aceweek.org. They have a whole reading list on there, and I think it documents better than I've unfortunately not read any books in that regard. No, I've watched a few shows that do varying degrees of decent jobs of it. I also know that they just crowdfunded a movie, Dear Luke, Love Me, that got, I think it got 1.4 million worth of funding to be the first, you know, major motion picture that actually, you know, has a ace relationship as, you know, part of its protagonist. So excited to see that come to fruition.
Some of the fantasy books that I view as being ace. One of the fairy tales that I consider ace is Beauty and the Beast. Robin McKinley writes a lot of fairy tale books, fantasy books. Sunshine is one if you are into the whole vampire range. Another is Chalice. And there's a few, I mean, some of her books do have romantic relationships, so she kind of covers the spectrum, but I think I've had a handful of her books that strike me more as romantic connections without that sexual attraction being there.
All right, and I think we have time for one last question. Unfortunately, the person asking this has had tech issues, so they missed most of the presentation. But they would like to know what media or influencers do you feel well represents the ACE experience?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What media or influencers do you feel well represents the ACE experience? I'd imagine this is people, shows, movies.
I mean, we pointed to a few on one of our slides. Angela Chen, Yasmin, and Dr. Singh. You know, TV shows, there's ACE representation in the show Everything's Gonna Be Okay. It's on Hulu. You know, Todd from BoJack Horseman. Lawrence from Sex Education. Shows a bit graphic, but you know, if you're okay with that, that's got it. There's not enough, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
All right. Well, I think it's Kelly says we need to get some more. And Peridot from Steven Universe. Peridot.
Oh, Peridot. Yeah, she's pretty around.
There's a character from like Has Been Hotel as well. That's kind of like, I forget the name.
Someone in the external chat called out Tanya Huff. She's got some really good books. I'm not.
And Rowan Ellis on YouTube.
Yeah.
Loveless is great. Yeah, it's a good book recommendation.
For those science fiction people, Spock is asexual. A lot of people also consider Sherlock Holmes as asexual.
Could call us in chat on Parvati from the Outer Worlds. My favorite character.
Yeah,
in every game.
Parvati. Oh.
I think they're going to shut us off soon. Thank you, everybody,
Aw.
for staying on. Please feel free to message any one of us. I know we'd love to answer questions, keep in touch.
And
I'm going to go
for those
back to, really quick, I'm going to close on the contact information. So you can all see that again. Thank you so much. I feel so honored to know these three. We have monthly ACE lunches where I just get to learn so much more. And yeah, I really do love these three people. They're amazing. And thanks for watching this.
Thank you.
Thank you.